made her first husband agree to a pregnancy contract to make sure that she was afforded.
Isn't it? It's Trevor who obviously had to deal with that,
The room didn't know how to breathe anymore. Phones were already vibrating before Trevor Engelslin finished his sentence, but no one dared interrupt him, not because he was powerful, not because he demanded authority, but because the sentence itself had weight. The kind of weight that settles slowly, presses against the chest, and doesn't release once it lands. Sometimes, he said calmly, almost conversationally, it's just a single piece of paper, but that can be enough to end an entire marriage.
Working on this project for the past 9 months has been...
At first, no one understood what he meant. This was supposed to be a film premiere, a polished room, soft lighting, predictable questions about budgets, casting choices, creative risk. Trevor was smiling when he said it, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He hadn't planned to say her name. He never did. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew who the story belonged to.
Official project as a royal, a very special cookbook.
For years, Meghan Markle's first marriage had existed as a footnote, brief, mutually respectful, a relationship that simply didn't work out. That explanation had been accepted because it was neat, unthreatening, and emotionally neutral. No villain, no victim, just incompatibility. Trevor dismantled that narrative in under 2 minutes. My ex-wife, he continued, choosing his words with surgical care, told me she couldn't have children. She showed me a medical report. It was definitive, clinical, final. I believed it. The air shifted instantly, because the woman the world now knew was not childless. She was a mother, twice over, and Trevor knew exactly what he was doing by placing those two realities side by side without connecting them outright. He didn't accuse, he didn't shout, he didn't dramatize. He simply let the contradiction sit in the open. I accepted the divorce, he said, voice steady, not because I wanted out, but because I believed I was respecting her reality. That was the moment the room froze, because respect was the one thing no one could weaponize against him. If he had framed himself as angry or betrayed, it would have been easy to dismiss. But this was restraint. This was reflection. This was a man describing a decision he believed was compassionate at the time. And then he said the line that changed everything. Not long after, Trevor added, she began a new life. And then she had children. No gasp, no immediate reaction, just the sound of pens stopping mid-sentence. He didn't say it was impossible. He didn't say it was fraudulent. He didn't even say it was dishonest.
You may think you know Meghan Markle the royal, the tabloid subject, the actress.
He just let the silence do the work. I'm not saying that's wrong, he clarified, almost gently. I'm just saying that when you put those two facts next to each other, something feels unresolved. Unresolved was an understatement. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Not in full quotes, not in clean transcripts, but in fragments, headlines, anonymous summaries, half-heard retellings that sharpened the edges with every repetition. Meghan in tears. Ex-husband breaks silence. Infertility claim sparks new questions. Inside Meghan's circle, the reaction was immediate and furious. Trevor was accused of cruelty, of dredging up private pain for relevance, of weaponizing health issues to destabilize a woman who had already endured enough scrutiny. But something about the way he told the story refused to disappear, because Trevor hadn't framed himself as a victim. He framed himself as someone who believed a document, and documents carry authority. 2 days later, under mounting pressure, Trevor released a short statement. No emotion, no escalation. I did not intend to defame or accuse anyone, it read. I shared my personal experience as it occurred. The facts are the facts as I understood them at the time. Then came the part that shifted the conversation entirely. He addressed the timeline. According to Trevor, the marriage had not legally ended when his ex-wife began appearing publicly with another man. He avoided the word affair, but he didn't deny overlap either. He released a witness statement from a London bar employee who confirmed seeing Meghan and Prince Harry together multiple times while the marriage paperwork was still active. Not intimate behavior, not scandalous scenes, just presence. And presence was enough. Because this wasn't about morality anymore. It was about sequencing, about which explanation came first and which justification followed. At the center of everything was the document, the infertility report. Trevor revealed it quietly, without fanfare, a copy, redacted, no clinic name, no dramatic unveiling, just confirmation that the paper existed and that it had been presented as final. "I never questioned it," he said later. "Why would I? I trusted her." That trust, he explained, was the reason the divorce unfolded without resistance. No lawyers fighting, no media briefings, no demands for clarification. He stepped aside because he believed he was honoring something irreversible. Then Meghan had children, and the paper stopped making sense. Meghan's response came 3 days later. Her statement was composed, professional, and unmistakably defensive. She denied falsifying any documents, denied misleading Trevor, denied using medical information as leverage. She explained that fertility diagnoses are complex, often temporary, and subject to change over time. What was discussed, she wrote, has been removed from its medical context. She released additional documentation, not a direct contradiction of the infertility report, but a reframing of it. Notes about low fertility potential, risk assessments, language that suggested uncertainty rather than impossibility. The narrative shifted again.
To deal with the ring being returned by post, and you're so right. It's like, shit.
This wasn't a lie, her team implied. It was a misunderstanding. But the damage had already been done because Trevor hadn't accused her of being incapable of having children forever. He accused her of ending a marriage with a conclusion she later lived in contradiction to. And once that question existed, it refused to go away. As the public split into camps, one defending medical complexity and the other questioning motive, Trevor remained quiet until something else surfaced. A former employee from the clinic where the infertility report had allegedly originated came forward anonymously. And what they described didn't attack Meghan's body. It attacked the paperwork. According to the source, Meghan had not appeared in person at the clinic on the date listed. There was no intake form, no patient signature, no laboratory codes attached to the diagnosis. The report existed, but it stood alone. And once that detail entered the story, everything changed. Because this was no longer about feelings, fertility, or failed love. It was about whether a marriage had been ended by a document that was never properly created. And that was only the beginning. The revelation landed like a fault line, splitting open beneath everything that had come before. Up until that point, the story could still be framed as emotional, painful, personal, a misunderstanding between two people who once loved each other and later lived very different lives. But the moment procedure entered the conversation, signatures, intake records, laboratory codes, the narrative shifted from heartbreak to structure. Because structure doesn't care about feelings. Structure either exists or it doesn't. When Meghan finally broke her silence again, the tone had changed. Gone was the expansive explanation about medical nuance and shifting diagnoses. This time, her response was narrow, defensive, and carefully boxed. "I did go to the clinic," she stated. "I was examined, but due to privacy concerns and the nature of the consultation, standard procedures were handled discreetly. Discreetly."
It's very doable. And that was a big motivator for us.
That single word became the new battleground. Medical professionals immediately pushed back, not against Meghan personally, but against the idea that fertility evaluations could bypass fundamental documentation. Privacy does not erase signatures. Confidentiality does not remove test identifiers. Discretion does not eliminate the need for a patient's physical presence. The silence that followed from Meghan's team was louder than any denial. Meanwhile, Trevor did something unexpected. He didn't escalate. He didn't demand retractions. He didn't threaten lawsuits or push for investigation. Instead, he released one final statement, shorter than all the others combined. "I trusted a document," it read. "I made a life-altering decision based on it. If that document was incomplete, misrepresented, or created under irregular circumstances, then the truth matters, Not for revenge, but for clarity. Clarity. That word reframed everything. Because this was no longer about Meghan's children or her motherhood. No one credible was questioning their existence. No one was attempting to erase them or undermine their legitimacy. What was being questioned was the story told before they ever existed. And stories, once challenged, don't return to their original shape. As analysts and commentators revisited old interviews, something else became apparent. Meghan had rarely spoken about her first marriage in concrete terms. When she did, the explanations were vague. Different paths, growing apart, timing, never infertility, never sacrifice, never a heartbreaking medical revelation that forced a respectful separation. That narrative belonged solely to Trevor, and the fact that it had never been contradicted until now raised a quiet but persistent question. Why had she allowed it to stand unchallenged for so long? In private, sources whispered that Meghan was devastated, not publicly collapsing, not issuing emotional pleas, but shaken. Because this wasn't an attack she could redirect with moral framing or broad statements about misogyny and intrusion. This was about paper, and paper doesn't care who you married next. As the media cycle dragged on, attention shifted again, this time toward timing. The proximity between the alleged infertility diagnosis, the rapid dissolution of the marriage, and the early appearances with Harry created a narrative arc that felt too clean to be accidental. Was the diagnosis the cause, or the exit strategy? That question lingered, unanswered. What complicated things further was the emotional contrast between the two former spouses. Trevor never presented himself as wronged. He never said he was betrayed. He never claimed infidelity outright. His restraint made the accusations feel heavier, not lighter, because he wasn't asking the public to take sides. He was asking them to notice inconsistencies. Meghan's supporters continued to argue that no one is owed access to a woman's medical history, and they were right. But this was no longer about access. It was about justification, about whether deeply personal information had been selectively deployed at a critical moment to justify a decision already made. As days turned into weeks, the story stopped trending, but it didn't disappear. It settled. It became one of those unresolved chapters that never fully closes, because no authority steps in to conclude it. There was no court ruling, no medical board review, no definitive exposure. Just two incompatible versions of the same ending, and in the absence of a verdict, perception began to harden. Meghan's public appearances grew more controlled, her language tightened, mentions of resilience and survival increased, as if preemptively reinforcing her moral position. But something had shifted. The certainty was gone. The ease had evaporated. People listened differently now. Every mention of truth, every appeal to authenticity, every carefully curated narrative was filtered through a new lens. What else had been framed rather than explained? Trevor, for his part, returned to his work. He gave no further interviews. He didn't chase relevance. He didn't capitalize on the controversy. And that restraint, more than anything else, made his version harder to dismiss, because he had nothing to gain by continuing. The final irony was this: the story wasn't ultimately about infertility at all. It was about trust, about how one person trusted a document enough to step aside from a marriage, and how another trusted that silence would remain permanent. It was about how narratives are constructed not only by what is said, but by what is never challenged. And once challenged, never fully restored. In the end, no one cried on camera. No courtroom doors slammed. No truths were formally declared. But something fundamental cracked. The idea that every chapter of Meghan's past had been transparently told. The belief that all exits were clean. The assumption that reinvention leaves no residue, because sometimes the most devastating revelations don't come with proof beyond doubt. They come with doubt that refuses to leave. And that doubt, quiet, procedural, unresolved, became the final inheritance of a marriage everyone thought had ended years ago.